Good morning, everyone. Lots going on as usual. And just a quick show note. Yesterday, and actually today, I don't have any internet right now. My internet is out right now. But my whole neighborhood has been experiencing internet problems with Rogers. And the issue is neighborhood-wide, I suppose. Even the Tim Hortons was having problems with their payment gateway. So that's problematic. Yesterday, I uploaded the show on my phone, on my Wi-Fi hotspot. So that's why it was uploaded kind of sporadically through the day. I will try to avoid that today, but the internet just came back. But we'll see how it goes. It's been in and out, and that's the reason BitChute's not working as well, because I'll get like 35% of the way through, and then it'll fail. And then the next time it won't pick it up where it was. It'll start over. So you know, what are you going to do? Yesterday evening, it worked better. Anyway, this is not the show about my internet. Don't forget to join the mailing list. The mailing list is, you can find it at CanadaReport.co. I've sent out 5. They're pretty good, I guess. I don't know. They're pretty fun. And you can also join at CanadaPoly.com and also join the conversation. Every day there's quite a robust conversation. There's lots of people joining, so join us. It would be great. Let's talk about China. New report details Beijing's foreign influence operations in Canada. That is not a surprise to anybody paying attention. And that's been happening for a very long time. Again, known by anybody paying attention. China has set up a sophisticated network in this country to harass people of Chinese ethnicity and Uyghur and Tibetan Canadians, distort information in the media, influence politicians, and form partnerships with universities to secure intellectual property, a new study says. Did you guys watch the Garnet Genius, Genis? I don't know. I'm not exactly sure how you say his name, but I'm terrible at saying names. Interview in the House of Commons with the Carleton professor, and he said, how do you feel about mainland China and XYZ? And he just stonewalled him, right? And this is a guy who was opening up Confucius institutions. I think he's part of a Confucius institution at Carleton. But it's interesting when it's kind of an open secret. Parliament knows, and they're questioning the professor who knows what Parliament knows. And everybody's just carrying on as if this is not happening, but it is happening. Okay, anyway, back to this. A report by Alliance Canada Hong Kong, ACHK, was tabled on Monday evening at the Special House of Commons Committee on Canada-China Relations, warns that the influence operations by the People's Republic of China are widespread, but have gone largely unnoticed. Alliance Canada Hong Kong is an umbrella group for Hong Kong pro-democracy advocates in this country. In Canada, individuals and groups are targeted by Chinese party state actors and Chinese nationalists, both directly and indirectly, she said, the report titled, In Plain Sight, Beijing's Unrestricted Network of Foreign Influence in Canada. Chinese authorities coordinate intimidation operations and use families who are in PRC-controlled regions as bargaining chips. Cherry Wong, executive director of ACHK, said the human rights group is trying to draw attention to the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, surveillance and intimidation without fanning the flames of xenophobia. The report details how the United Front Works Department, the agency responsible for coordinating Beijing's overseas influence operation, guides and controls an elaborate network of proxies and front organizations to intimidate and co-opt Chinese Canadians, as well as politicians, academics, and business leaders. The United Front has created and mobilized shell groups, registered non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and civil societies in Canada. These groups are designed to mimic legitimate community programs while aggressively spreading pro-Beijing messages and party lines, whether in praising Hong Kong's national security laws or condemning dissent against the Beijing Olympics. Harassment and intimidation campaigns are organized by the United Front affiliated community groups, and misinformation is directed from WeChat and Chinese language media against Uyghurs, Tibetans, Taiwanese, pro-democracy Hong Kongers, and dissidents from mainland China, the report said. WeChat is among the top news sources for Chinese... Oh, sorry, I skipped that. The report said Canadian universities and research institutions are especially vulnerable to foreign influence, citing Chinese-funded Confucius institutes that spout Beijing propaganda and partnerships with Canadian academics to obtain intellectual property. Various Canadian universities are known to collaborate with potentially compromising entities like the People's Liberation Army, the report said, noting that many academics don't understand China's efforts to blur the lines between civilian and military research. There's more to this paper, but I'm just going to leave it there. Here's another one. China exporting their authoritarianism overseas through Canadian institutions, Hong Kong advocate warns. Oops, I forgot to highlight this one too. Here we go. Both of these articles are about the same thing, so it's just a slightly different take. I'm not going to read all of it, but here's a picture of Miss Wang, and it says, Chinese authorities have been exploiting their authoritarianism overseas by infiltrating democratic institutions in Canada and elsewhere as a way to stifle criticism of the communist state, one expert told parliamentarians on Monday. In testimony before the House of Commons Special Committee on Canada-China Relations, Cherry Wang, executive director of the Alliance Canada-Hong Kong, warned about extensive efforts by Communist Party of China in recent years to sway public opinion and deflect criticism, even in foreign countries. Okay, and so I read through the Globe and Mail version of this, basically. And I want to tie this up with this opinion piece, which calls out the Prime Minister for his behavior on the floor of the House of Commons, misleading Canadians, I think. But here it says, questioning government policy on China is not fomenting racism, Minister. Last week, Conservative MP Candice Bergen asked Prime Minister Justin Trudeau why scientists at the Winnipeg Infectious Disease Laboratory had been collaborating with Chinese military scientists. 2 Canadian scientists have been fired from the lab, so Ms. Bergen's question was reasonable. Mr. Trudeau's response was not. The rise in anti-Asian racism we've been seeing over the past number of months should be of concern to everyone, Mr. Trudeau replied from left field. I would recommend that the members of the Conservative Party, in their zeal to make personal attacks, not start to push too far into intolerance toward Canadians of diverse origins. While we need to protect Asian minorities from hate, we also need to question this government's willingness to cooperate with China despite its misdeeds. Hold on, pause. Just want a quick question. Why do we need to protect anybody from hate? I mean, like, from one group inciting violence against another group, sure. But like on the individual level of hate, you could dislike somebody and have nothing to do with their race or ethnicity. And does that mean that you're engaging in hate? Right? Like, and so like, I think that if you're engaging in something that is targeting somebody because of their ethnicity or their race or something like that, maybe you could have an argument. But like an argument for the government's job is to protect minorities from hate. I don't think that that's the government's job. I think the government's job is to dutifully keep the law. Hold on. There's a word, specific word. Enforce the law. That's it. Enforce the law as equal, right? Rule of law is everybody is equal in the eyes of the law, and the law is enforced equally on everyone, which we don't have, right? But the idea that we need to protect minorities from hate, when did that enter the zeitgeist? Is that even a charter right? Like, we have charter rights that are being trodden all over, and now we have responsibilities to protect specific people from hate? I don't think so. I don't think that's true, and I don't think that's even responsible. I don't even think that that's a goal that is achievable. Protect somebody from hate. You could be trying to protect somebody from hate, and then inadvertently lock them in their house for a year, right? Oh no, sorry, we just messed up and imprisoned you for a year in your house, and made you shut down and bankrupt your business. My goodness, our mistake, right? Like, come on. I think this is a very insidious way to rewrite what we're supposed to be doing. And protecting minorities from hate, I'm sorry, that is not how you run a country. And this is a huge distraction from like the complete garbage and garbage leadership that we've had. Trudeau has made many mistakes. And I think that any thinking person can connect the dots here, right? Any thinking person can look at the infiltration and the aggressive moves by the CCP and tie that with Trudeau's out of left field statement. We don't need to protect people from hate. We need to hold our leaders accountable and stop being completely irrational in our approach to the world. That's what we need to do. Protect people from hate. What unbelievable ridiculousness. Garbage. This is a professional person who writes for a living? Like, seriously. By news staff. Unbelievable. Why we need to protect people from hate. Asian minorities can take care of themselves. They've been doing it for a very long time. Like, and not take care of themselves, they're on their own, but like, welcome to Canada, make of it what you will, right? Like, we're in a free country, so that gives you the freedom to pursue your interests and worship in your own way and make of that what you can. It doesn't mean the government is here to protect you. Here's some pillows. Put on this helmet, sir. Well, you're an Asian minority, don't you know, and you need some protection. Here's your helmet. And your parachute. I know you're not planning on skydiving today, but just in case, we don't want you to fall. Pull this, right? Like, what insanity? No, sir, we don't want you driving. You're an Asian minority. Don't you know the stats on that? Asian minorities die in car accidents 3 times more than white people. Like, where did you get that stat from? I don't know. It's insanity. It's crazy. It doesn't make any sense. Okay. It is irresponsible to slander the opposition for... Back to the article. It is irresponsible to slander the opposition for doing its job in asking why scientists at the Winnipeg lab were cooperating with Chinese scientists, just as it was irresponsible for the government to allege racism back in the winter of 2020 when conservatives asked why Ottawa had not imposed a travel ban on China amid reports of a dangerous new virus emanating from Wuhan. Do you see a pattern here? It seems like every time an uncomfortable question is asked about China, the government says, hey, that's racist. And isn't that a tactic that is used by the CCP? Isn't it? Didn't I read that and talk about that 2 days ago? 2 or 3 days ago? It's crazy. As late as March 5th, as countries around the world imposed travel restrictions, Mr. Trudeau accused his circles of intolerance and questioning Canada's wide open borders. There's a lot of misinformation out there and a lot of knee-jerk reaction that isn't keeping people safe, Mr. Trudeau said on March 5th. That is having real challenging impacts on communities, on community safety. Days later, Canada closed its borders to the world. I wonder how much impact closing all the businesses in the community has on the community's safety. Is that positive? Does that help? Let's close all the shops on Queen Street. Yay! Well, you're welcome. I saved you from something. It's insane. It's insane. That is having real and challenging impacts on communities. Days later, Canada closed its borders to the world. Some commentators allege that even suggesting the virus might have escaped from a Chinese laboratory in Wuhan is a racist conspiracy theory. But President Joe Biden last week ordered the intelligence services to redouble their efforts to determine whether that happened. We all need to fight racial intolerance toward Asian Canadians, because the government's mandating it. Here's your helmet. But it is not racist to ask why this Liberal government still hasn't banned, as other countries have, the use of Huawei technologies in Canada's 5G network, why it launched a failed effort to co-produce a COVID-19 vaccine with China, or why the Winnipeg lab was cooperating with Chinese military. China is a major power and economy, dealing with that reality while also condemning its persecution of the Uyghur minority, its suppression of democracy in Hong Kong, its arbitrary imprisonment of Canadians, Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig, over an extradition dispute, its aggressive actions in the South China Sea, and its threatening actions towards Taiwan is one of the biggest challenges in Canadian foreign policy. It's the job of opposition parties to scrutinize the government's conduct as it executes that policy. Accusing the Conservatives of fomenting racism every time they ask a legitimate question about China does more to encourage intolerance than any question the Conservatives might ask. The Prime Minister conflated our legitimate concerns about national security with racism against Asian Canadians, Conservative MP Nellie Shin told the House. He spun an inflammatory narrative that implies Conservatives are stoking intolerance. By using this false narrative, he has cheapened and undermined the ongoing efforts to combat the rise of anti-Asian racism. Holy smoke. Holy smoke, right? I think it would be easy to tie back to what's going on here and to look at the Chinese infiltration of NGOs and universities and other public places, other public institutions. And it's, can you extrapolate to the office of the PMO? Can you extrapolate to leadership positions? Can you extrapolate to even down to the provinces, right? At what point does it seem like our leadership is listening to us at all? Or does it seem like they're running a plan, right? I'll show you evidence that I think they're running a plan, maybe, but who knows? Who knows? Blacklock's reporter is reporting. Ethics chief says he never interviewed Justin Trudeau in the We Charity probe because written questions were just as good. Oh, okay. Sounds great. Why do we have an ethics office again? Here's your fine of $200. That was bad. Don't do that again. Here, put your wrist out and let me slap it. Right? Like, I just don't believe that. I just don't believe that an office that is toothless and that basically allowed the Prime Minister to have We Charities pay his mother and then allowed the Prime Minister to give a no competition contract to We of nearly $1 billion. I just think that there's something fishy there. And if the ethics office doesn't, without a good explanation, I don't know. Color me skeptical. Here's Derek Sloan asking a question. It's interesting because the Prime Minister, or the Prime Minister's representative in this answer, says that protests are just fine, just not those, well, just as long as you're following the COVID-19 rules. And I guess the COVID-19 rules are only not followed by anti-masker pro-freedom protesters. Everybody else follows the COVID-19 rules perfectly. Here's the question and answer. I guess I should read what Derek Sloan said. I rose today to ask why Justin Trudeau attends and supports public protests he agrees with, while asserting that protests he doesn't agree with are threats to public health. Does this government support the rights of all Canadians, or doesn't it? And the answer is typical liberal answer. It's a talking point, accusing Sloan of not understanding where he's going wrong. And it's basically reminiscent of like a teenage fight with your girlfriend where she says, if you don't understand, then you don't deserve me, or something like that. And you're like, huh? Anyway, here we go. It's a trope, right?
The honourable member for Hastings, Lennox, Addington.
Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister speaks from both sides of his mouth when defending our rights and freedoms. Last year, he attended a public protest in Ottawa, a violation of Ontario's emergency measures, yet he also claims lockdown protesters spread COVID, as if COVID spreads only at rallies he doesn't like. He's affirmed the right of thousands of pro-Palestinian protesters who were not ticketed by police, yet I, as a sitting MP, received 2 court summons for attending other peaceful outdoor protests. Can the government confirm the Prime Minister is in favour of all Canadians' right to peacefully protest, or just the causes he personally endorses?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, it's unfortunate that the honourable member doesn't understand how to follow local public health rules, but they are in place, in fact, to keep Canadians safe and to stop the spread of COVID-19. And I recommend that if he continues to get summons, there is a problem with his interpretation of these public health measures. They are serious. They are put in place to keep Canadians safe, but a person's ability to peacefully protest has not changed. The measures are in place to keep Canadians safe by stopping the spread of COVID-19, and I recommend he take that.
So that's
the honourable member for Hastings, Lennox, Addington.
Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister speaks from both sides of his mouth. He's affirmed the...
Sorry about that. Twitter went crazy. So they're backhandedly blaming Derek Sloan for doing something wrong, while the Prime Minister can do no wrong and attend any protest he likes. Very interesting take on it. And this is kind of the same line that the Calgary police were taking. Like the protest that the pro-freedom, anti-mask, anti-restriction protests, they were either lying, they were doing an event like a rodeo, or the Freedom March was somehow not a freedom protest by the Calgary police chief's definition. But the Palestinian marches, those are fine, or the Israeli marches, whichever side you want to be on, those are fine. So that's just like the Black Lives Matter marches, right? They're provoking people, and that is the purpose of this, right? I just want to point it out. And this is further provocation, right? Like maybe you sitting MP, you independent sitting MP, you've got it wrong. Gaslighting, right? It's the same thing. This was interesting. I came across this yesterday, and I did not screenshot it, but I found the screenshots of it. And so Speaker of Truth, and this account has been done, it's done. I checked before I went to bed last night and it was fine, and then somewhere through the night the account got nuked. And I don't know if the person took it down themselves or if it got nuked because it's embarrassing to the PMO, but it is embarrassing to the PMO. So thank you, Hannah, for backing it up. And so Speaker of Truth said, there's been a lot of chatter around why I started this account. I'm a staffer on the Hill. I've witnessed things that would make HR professionals cringe. This isn't my story. It's the truth around how Katie Telford, has failed all staff except those who drink with her. I've spent the last few years sexually harassed by senior staff at the PMO, a former senior staffer who Katie supports. Concerns around his inappropriate relationship were brought to her. She didn't care. She failed us all. We're seeing this in the forces, but it's also in the PMO. And then, so this was a screenshot of the account. A staffer who no longer drinks the Kool-Aid. We only share the truth here. No gossip. DMs are open. Share your stories. Help make a difference. And so it was started in May. She only had 69 tweets, or she or he, whatever it is. And they were showing screenshots of all sorts of things. So the account is nuked, but I recommend going through these images. It's if you're interested in gossip about Parliament Hill, Have a look. It's very interesting what's happening here. So links are in the description. Just check out Hannah's status there, and have a look through. Very interesting stuff happening in the PMO. Catherine McKenna dyed her hair green. She was fundraising, right? And if it's like shaving your head as in high school, right? Shaving your head as a teacher or something like that. If X amount of dollars is reached, we'll shave our head. You'd think that the Minister of Infrastructure would be able to do something more than like a high school teacher, right? Is it bad to be disappointed that this is our government? And I mean, it doesn't look great either, I don't know. The green hair just is not doing it, Catherine. It's yikes, right? And so, color me not green. Somebody said nice roots. I'm sure it's temporary, but still, I don't know. Is this like the initiatives you want to see? Is this the things you want them to be focusing on? These are our leaders, right? Here's Justin Trudeau. Black Canadian business owners and entrepreneurs face systemic barriers in starting and growing their businesses. To address these long-standing systemic barriers and help them succeed, we're launching the Black Entrepreneurs Loan Fund. Watch live. And the responses to this are like, that's pretty racist, eh? Like, that's pretty racist. And a whole bunch of people saying the Kamloops residential schools was overseen by your dad. So what's up with that? Still, we'll get to the residential schools in a minute. We'll talk about that. We will, because it's important. Ezra Levette says, this is a political gift from the lockdown class to itself. There is no medical reason for one to favor one interested group over another. It's purely political. Kids' hockey teams are still banned. They're not important. The Leafs lost last night. Sorry, spoiler alert if you're a hockey fan who wants to relive the awful Game 7 that was. But here's why this is kind of funny. So Doug Ford changed his plans, sent Dr. Warner, and usually, like if you are a doctor in an office, right? Most of the doctors, I used to work in kids' mental health, so I would go and hang out. Well, I would take the kids to appointments. That was part of the job. And you get to know the nurses and you get to know the doctors, because we'd always go back to the same doctors, and it was like years, right? Like I worked there for a very long time. So we go back to the same doctors. You kind of get to know them. They kind of get to know you. Most of the doctors would give up their spot at something like this, like the Leafs game. So Dr. Warner says, thankful to the Maple Leafs for this opportunity. The worst is behind us. The future is promising. This guy's like, Toronto is burning down. Everybody needs to stay in their houses, blah, 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 blah. And now he's like, oh, thanks for the Leafs game tickets, guys. This is great. 500 other people. Woo, right? It's hypocritical and it's tone deaf. But most people in his position, most people in a head of office position, if you were bestowed Leaf tickets, you don't go, yeah, I worked for these, right? You say, here, you guys, like, you send somebody. You don't go yourself. You send two of your staff. Like, have fun or whatever, however it works for you, right? Like usually that's how it kind of goes. Even like the archetypal, like in a movie, right? Like the hero gets something and then he passes it on to other people who are more deserving, right? Because that's how it works, man. I don't know. What a piece of work, eh? Not to mention the stay-at-home order, right? So this guy, Rowan, says, urgent, I can't get through to Premier Ford's office. There's a busy tone. I need confirmation if the stay-at-home order is in effect or not. Any comment? So Christine Elliott on yesterday says, stay-at-home order is currently in effect for all of Ontario. Only leave home for essential purposes such as food, healthcare, exercise, or work. It's the law. And Doug Ford says, I can't think of a better way to support the Maple Leafs in this crucial game than having our healthcare heroes cheer them on in person. Go Leafs, go. And then Warner's there. And that's just, what a piece of work, right? Under a stay-at-home order, right? What's the rules? If you're in a specific class, you get to ignore the rules, right? Weird. Bill C6 alert. The debate on the third reading of Bill C6 to ban conversion therapy will continue on May 31st, starting around noon Eastern EDT, Eastern time. You can watch the live debate here. The bill will then go to the Senate, where there will be another committee hearing. Bill C6 update. Debate is resumed. Carrie Lynn Finley is continuing her speech calling for the clarification of the definition to exclude good faith conversations. Don't have time to listen to the whole debate, but we'll watch for highlights. So yeah, there's still lots of stuff getting done in the legislature, and it's very concerning what they're doing if you're paying attention to what's happening in BC. This is concerning. Ontario mandating vaccine policies at all long-term care homes. And you think, okay, well, maybe they've got a reason for that, and probably there'll be an exemption. There's lots of precedent in Ontario law for exemptions for this kind of thing, flu vaccines and all sorts of stuff, right? Starting July 1st, all Ontario long-term care homes will be required to have COVID-19 vaccination policies in place for staff, the Ministry of Long-Term Care announced on Monday. The new policies will provide staff with 3 options. They can either provide proof of vaccination, proof of a valid medical exemption for the shot, or be required to take an educational course about the benefits of the approved vaccines and the risks of not being vaccinated. Reeducation camps are a go in Ontario, right? Oh, wow. There we go. Ontario will become the first province in Canada to make such a policy mandatory. The vast majority of long-term care staff have embraced vaccination to protect their residents. For those without medical issues who are still reluctant, a mandatory education program will be helpful to correct misinformation and alleviate their concerns, the Ontario Long-Term Care Association said in a release. YAF also hinted that the vaccination policies could become more widespread beyond long-term care homes. Quote, I see there is potential for this kind of thing being used in other settings, she said. In terms of employees, you cannot require somebody to be vaccinated, but you can require them to provide proof if the policy of the institution is they have a choice. Vaccinate, exemptions, or education. I see this as a very positive trend. So I don't understand. Maybe I'm dumb. I'm probably dumb. It's okay. I don't mind. I don't mind being wrong, and I don't mind putting something out there that illustrates that I don't get it. But this, I don't get it. We can't mandate vaccines. Okay, right? In terms of employees, you cannot require somebody to be vaccinated. Okay, that seems pretty straightforward. I agree with that. That seems like what the law has been up till now, right? But then she says, but you can require them to provide proof if the policy institution says they have a choice, vaccinate, exemption, or education. Well, if you can write a policy that says our staff are required to be vaccinated, what the heck does your first statement mean in terms of employees? You cannot require somebody to be vaccinated. And my medical status is my personal data. That's up to me. It's private, right? Now, there are situations in mental health, say, where you have to get a TB test and you have to show people that you are TB free. And I don't know if that is constitutionally upheld, but I guess in that setting, blah, 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 they can require a TB test, but they can't require inoculation, as far as I understand it. And so what happened to the first sentence? You can't require somebody to be vaccinated, but you can say our policy requires that you make a choice. Okay. I think that you just said you're speaking out both sides of your mouth there, Dr. Yaff. Like on one side, you're saying they can't possibly do that. And on the other side, you're saying, but if they just do that, it's fine. If their policy says, if their policy says it, then you have to do it. No thanks. There are privacy laws and no. Who among Canada's essential workers has been vaccinated? Schools have been closed since April because we've been told that the teachers aren't vaccinated. And now less than half are vaccinated. And aren't they all able to get vaccinated? Haven't there been priority teachers, like priority teacher time slots in Guelph, etc.? Like we've had lots of people vaccinated, but we've only got, according to this, in Ontario, roughly 40% of teachers have received their COVID-19 vaccination, a good sign as the province begins to reopen and students look to head back to the classroom, but a troubling sign considering that some 2/3 of Ontario's overall population has gotten at least one dose. That data about teachers was included in a letter sent this week by Premier Doug Ford, seeking advice on school reopenings and expressing concern with the effectiveness of the COVID-19 vaccines against the variant that originated in India. Mm-hmm. What makes this new information concerning is that only 41% of teachers and education workers are vaccinated compared to 62% of the general adult population in Ontario, Ford's letter says. Even in Ontario, where the Premier specifically said what the rate is, the Ontario Teachers Federation was unable to confirm what percentage of teachers had been vaccinated, demonstrating just how difficult this information is to come by. It's not difficult to come by, it's in the letter. Come on. We don't have any idea how many teachers have been vaccinated at this point, wrote Scott Perkin with the Federation. Now, the 41% is all education workers. I've heard that teachers are in the high 70s for vaccinated, and the 41% is because the EAs and speech and language and all of the other associated workers aren't taking it as high as the teachers. So that's an interesting thing to note. And that's anecdotal. That's just stories that I've heard. And I don't have any data, or I don't have any links to back that up. But that's what I've been hearing. So very interesting. The reason why this information is unclear is relatively simple. It's a privacy issue for unions and employers, and provinces don't necessarily track by occupation when people are booking vaccination appointments. So isn't that interesting? Like Dr. Yaf is saying, we could have this re-education program. I don't think they've got any infrastructure for this. I don't think they've got anything at all built that looks anything like this, but they're hypothesizing it. I think it's floating a balloon to see how people react to this re-education idea. I think it's a terrible idea. Tech savvy, moving into the CRTC's recent ruling that kind of screwed up competition in the telecommunications space. CRTC and Tech Savvy, Tech Savvy says government should overturn the CRTC ruling, calling the Competition Bureau. I agree, but what are you going to do? Okay, the mass grave, and yesterday I said I have so many questions. I have so many questions that this does not answer. I feel like there are even more questions now that I've dug into this a little bit and gotten some answers, but I still have questions. I think it's interesting the amnesia the press has for the party that was in power from 1968 to 1979, who oversaw the last 10 years of the residential schools, as DeMarcus Funk notes. John Chrétien was the Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development from July 5th, 1968 to August 7th, 1974. Maybe he's available for an interview about Kamloops. What do you say, Rosie Barton? Feel like working today? Dean Sikora... Dean, I'll not try the last name, says 2 facts the media aren't interested in. Pierre Trudeau was the Prime Minister of Canada from 1968 to 1979. The Kamloops residential school was run by Trudeau's Liberal government from 1969 to 78. So that is historical information that is being conveniently forgotten by everyone. Nobody is talking about that. Nobody's interested in that. Yesterday, I think I said mass grave. I said there's so many questions about what happened here. Is this, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, kids died way more often. And if the children the children's family didn't have the money to bury them, perhaps this was a solution. And I'll show you in this article. It was talked about apparently, but not acknowledged, I guess. And so that's an interesting thing. Mass grave with remains of 215 children found at Indigenous school in Canada, an unthinkable loss. This is May 29th, so I don't know if there's new information. This is just, I was trying to get the information. This is USA Today, so I don't know, mainstream as you get, right? But here you go. A mass grave containing the remains of 215 children, some as young as 3 years old, has been found on the site of what was once Canada's largest Indigenous residential school. The school is one of the institutions that held Indigenous children taken from families across the nation. Chief Roseanne Casimir of the First Nation said in a news release that the remains were confirmed last weekend with the help of ground-penetrating radar. Okay, have we dug up anything? Is there any documentation about this at all? In an earlier release, she called the discovery an unthinkable loss that was spoken about but never documented at the Kamloops Indian Residential School. It was the site of Canada's largest residential school. So it was spoken about but not documented? What does that even mean? Like, people were aware of this mass grave? What's the story they told about this mass grave? Was there, who was supposed to be in there? Like, what happened with those kids? What's the story? What's the historical context? And they don't get into that. They get into the self-flagellation part of this whole thing. But it's very strange. A report more than 5 years ago by Truth and Reconciliation Commission said that at least 3,200 children had died amid abuse and neglect, and said that it had reports of at least 51 deaths at the Kamloops school between 1915 and 1963. 51 deaths in about 50 years. Is that a lot? Like, is that supposed to be a shocking number, right? Like, I'm not sure that is the slam dunk that they're trying to make this into. And make no mistake, like the media is like, this is absolutely horrific, and like treating it as if this was a genocide of children somehow. And I don't know that the evidence backs that up. And I don't know that it doesn't, but I don't know that it does, right? And everything that I've seen has been kind of emotional rhetoric and not like, this is what happened, this is what happened. The reason I chose this article was because of the radar information. Like, that's pretty interesting and important information, don't you think? Like, maybe context to this. What did they say about it? Anyway, the Kamloops school operated between 1890 and 1969. Were all of those children, the 215 children, dead from like a modern era, or were they from the 1890s, right? Like, and since the 1890s, like, was it from the whole time? There's no context. It seems irresponsible for the news to be treating this the way they are. The Kamloops school operated between 1890 and 1969, when the federal government took over operations from the Catholic Church and operated it as a day school until it closed in 1978. That's when the Liberals took over. 1969, right, when Trudeau took over. So what's the context here? Is it the Canadian government or the Catholic Church? Context. It matters, right? Like, and if it's the Canadian government, it was only run for 10 years, and the only Canadian government leader to ever run it was Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Dear old dad. What? The context matters, and the media, our media, is ignoring it. So it operated as a day school until it closed in 78. Casimir said it is believed the deaths are undocumented, although a local museum archivist is working with the Royal British Columbian Museum to see if any records of the deaths can be found. Given the size of the school, with up to 500 students registered and attending at any one time, we understand that this confirmed loss affects First Nation communities across British Columbia and beyond, Casimir said in the initial release issued late Thursday. So in a residential school that would take kids from all sorts of different backgrounds, from the period of 1890 to 1970, let's just pretend that it all took place within that timeline. Maybe in the 70s, the Canadian government were burying children, but you would think that it wouldn't be in a mass grave. It would be documented, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we can discount that pretty confidently, right? But within that time frame, what's the context, right? That's a lot of years, considering I worked in children's mental health, and when you have the mentality of we're helping, Family and Children's Services has been in situations where they've had to defend their rationale for taking a child from a family, right? So if you believe you're helping and you go into somewhere and say, we're going to take your children and we're going to civilize them, we're going to give them Christianity, and we're going to teach them the ways of the West, and make them into these Canadians, and blah, 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 blah. You think you're helping in that context, right? And so they did that, but they would also take kids who didn't seem to have a home or a family or something like that to help, right? The idea was to help people, right? It wasn't to necessarily hurt people. Now, are there people who see an opportunity to usurp that and hurt people? Sure. The same can be said about Catholic churches and priests, right? Like, are there priests that exploit their position to hurt people? Absolutely. That happens. It's abhorrent. It's awful. But I don't know that this is like the Canadian government turning a blind eye to the Catholic schools, deaths, killing 200 children over 100 years or what, 70 years of overseeing these schools, right? I think there's probably context. I think there probably is. Churches and Catholic schools, et cetera, are historically pretty good at keeping records for this kind of thing. Anyway, regardless, I think that 500 students per year, like, it's not like it was 12 students a year. It's not like it was 40 students a year. We're talking about a lot of students at a residential school with lots of stories. Each person has a story, right? And not every story is the nuclear family is waiting home for their long lost kids. Some stories are much harder than that, right? And less clean. Edmonton calls for name change to Grandin LRT station, removal of mural depicting residential schools. The idea of the schools was not to hurt, it was to help, right? Which is why this is being highlighted. People are calling for the removal now, but the reason that you would look at that and think that's a good idea. And I mean, like, I'm not trying to excuse what we're finding out has happened, the abuse and the sexual abuse and all of that stuff. I'm not trying to say that that didn't happen or it's not important. It is important. It's part of our history, and we should acknowledge it and learn from it, but we shouldn't whitewash it. We shouldn't remove it. We shouldn't also shoehorn in a genocide and a mass murder of children when maybe that's not what happened, right? But that pretty soon that's going to be what happened because the media said so, and that's all that matters, right? And it's just scary. MPs vote to make September 30th Truth and Reconciliation paid holiday for federally regulated employees. People might ask how it can make a difference. Yeah, they might. They sure might. Right? What a way to honor this by giving the government employees a paid day off while the tax slaves get to pay for yet another holiday. Yay! Right? Like, some people get the day off, but not you, because you work in like a normal person job. So the Guardian, this is the long read version, but the Guardian says, but the title is Why Every Single Statue Should Be Taken Down. Why every single statue should be taken down. This is removal of the four olds. This is the Great Leap Forward. This is the modern version of that. They want our culture gone. Just put a bulldozer over it and we'll rebuild. We'll rebuild. Brand new culture. You didn't like Christmas? Let's have holiday celebration. Instead of like Easter and that being tied to Christianity, we'll just tie that directly to the Easter Bunny, right? Chocolate and the Easter Bunny, that's what Easter is now. Forget it, right? You'll barely notice the difference, but it'll happen. Right? Take a bulldozer to it. And then, the remembrances will pop up now and then, but we'll just, just like weeding. It's scary. It's scary because that's what's happening. This is British, clearly, like obviously, but it's the same that's happening across the Western world. Pay attention. Emergency powers are extended in Ontario, right? There is absolutely the leaked email seems to be very, very obvious fake news, but very accurate, right? Obviously fake, but extremely accurate. Yes. Nobody can deny that what it set out is happening, but obviously fake. Emergency measures are short and temporary. They're not meant to go on for 22 months. I'm not in favor of the extensions of the emergency order in Ontario till Monday, December 1st, 2021, but that's exactly what happened. 36 PCs voted yes and 22 voted no. And yes, that only adds up to 80. That's because a bunch of people just didn't vote, right? Yeah, right. Because, so 36 plus 22 is actually closer to 58, 60, right? So not 80, 60. We have a lot more MPPs in the House than that. And I'll show you who voted for and against in the next tab. But Randy Hillier says 66 MPPs did not find stopping foreign nations' harmful emergency powers important enough to vote. 36 of the PCs voted yes. Why did the rest of the party and opposition stay home? Do they rather their political career over their conscience? And so that's interesting. Here's the breakdown of the MPP's votes. And Doug Ford didn't vote, which I thought was interesting. Oh, my internet's not working. Oh no. My internet's not working. Okay, well, I'll give you a quick story and you can check the, that's because my internet's not working. I'll give you the quick overview and you can look for your MP. But no was, Mike Schreiner voted no, which, I mean, good for Mike. That's my MP. But Doug Ford is in the did not vote list, right? Doug Ford, look at that. Good old Dougie. He couldn't even bring himself to vote for his own motion. I don't know if it was his own motion, but like his own emergency order, the whole Reopening Ontario Act, that's on him, man. Like, what a crazy world. And then, can you play politics on that? Can you take that to your constituents and then say, I didn't vote for this thing. It's a stinky albatross that these guys voted for and not me. No, you can't do that. So, Canada won't rush reopening border with the United States, even though they were announcing that it was going to open on the 21st anyway. The U.S. is going to open to Canadians, and sorry about your luck, but I guess Canada won't let you out, which I don't know that they can. I don't know that they're able to do that. If the border is open on the U.S. side, I don't know that Canada can be like, well, I'm sure you could cross the border if you can find a road to get across the border, but that's 20 hours that way. If you ever reroute around, if you reroute in Niagara to get around tolls, it'll take you to Quebec. But anyway, very interesting, and it's a very long drive. But they're saying, nope, we're not going to reopen. It's not going to happen. So emergency powers have extended to December, and Canada is saying absolutely not. In the article, it says 75% of people need to be vaccinated. When we go over to the redacted part, and if you watched the redacted part yesterday, and it was Dr. Bridle, not Brindle. I apologize. Sometimes, like I said, people, I have hooks in my brain, and I kind of put it on the hook. And when I saw his name, Bridle came into my head. I was like, oh, Bridle, but it's, or Brindle, but it's Bridle. Brindle came into my head. I don't know why. Anyway, Bridle. That's who we're talking about. If you watch that and you saw all of that interesting vaccination information, well, you'll want to stay tuned for today. So very interesting stuff with regards to the emergency powers and tying it directly to vaccination rates, tying the opening to vaccination rates. That's problematic, but will probably result in exactly the same reopening pattern as the schools, right? Like once the teachers are all vaccinated, we can reopen. Oh, never mind. City News is reporting, getting into schools really quickly. Ford says an announcement on whether to reopen schools to in-person learning will be made within the next day or two. This is yesterday. Because there's no urgency there. No urgency. We've got to get the new medical officer of health up to speed, and then we'll figure out schools. Maybe in July, maybe in August, maybe in September, maybe October. We'll figure it out. Here is ER Doc Ontario responding to another doctor who says, for some reason, there's belief that schools drive COVID-19 transmission. The medical literature and major society statements do not support this belief. In this thread, we'll have a look at just a few. I'm not going to go through the thread. I've talked about it before. I've talked about how there's all sorts of data to back up safety of schools. And I've talked about how the difference between daycares, day camps, and schools is a union. Do you know, and I've talked about this before too, that if your child is in daycare, if your child is in care for whatever reason, like going to emergency care or something like that, they sit in a room with a laptop with a bunch of other kids at school, right? That's safe, but going to school is not safe? Come on. What a ridiculous idea. What a ridiculous, crazy idea. Is it believable? Not really. 15 months after just stay home, a few weeks to protect the NHS, and they're saying just a few more weeks yet again. Government urged to delay June 21 reopening by a month until schools break up. Oh, we just have to do 2 more weeks, guys. Anything to get you to do 2 more weeks, and they will shove it down your throat. Here's another brick in the wall for the Canadian email, the October 21st email. Remember when it said projected COVID-19 mutation into COVID-21, and so the COVID-21 will be the new kind of term. I think they renamed it to variant of concern or variant of interest. Here's today the WHO announced new easy to say labels for SARS-CoV-2 variants of concern and variants of interest. They will be replacing existing scientific terms. They will not be replacing existing scientific terms. They're aimed to help public discussion of variants of interest and variants of concern. So this is like the mutated version, right? So it doesn't map exactly, but it's pretty close. Somebody said to me as well yesterday, I mentioned that I hadn't seen tanks and things in the street, and that that was mentioned. And they said, what about the militarization of the police over the last 20 years or so? And that was a huge thing in like the late 2000s, so like 2008, 2009, the police were getting all these Humvees and things that were meant for the Iraq war, but they wanted, and the Afghanistan war, but they were trying to wind it down, so they were just giving it to police. Like they were making all these Humvees and just giving it to police. Now this was in the States, but it was quietly happening in Canada as well, right? Because hand in glove, lockstep and all that, right? This guy says, well, CBC is reporting, studies reveal the unintended consequences of delaying surgeries, drop in ER visits due to the pandemic. If it's a COVID death or a COVID case, it's important. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. That's how Sean Perkins said his experience in the Ontario healthcare system during the pandemic left him feeling. But non-COVID illnesses and deaths should matter too, he said. In August 2019, during a softball league game, his friends noticed his breathing sounded labored. Eventually, after a long journey to different specialists, the Caledon, Ontario man was told he had an obstruction in his airway that needed a CT scan. By that time, it was the end of February 2020, the cusp of the pandemic, and the Ontario government shut down all elective surgeries and procedures, so Perkins had to wait. As the weather got warmer and the humidity rose, it became harder to breathe. It was like trying to breathe as though you were sucking through a thick milkshake. Perkins finally got a CT scan at the end of May 2020, and it showed a sizable tumor cutting off 70 to 80% of his airway. He was designated as a Priority 1 patient, which the province defines as any condition in which failure to diagnose and initiate treatment would result in serious morbidity, mortality. Despite that, he still had to wait 3 more months for a biopsy. Perkins is far from alone. Ontario's surgery backlog is estimated at more than 257,000 cases and growing. Massive. It's incredible. I want to show you this, and then we'll go over to the redacted. This is a long show today. Holy smoke. PCR tests are not prone to false positives, despite what people say on Facebook. The experts say this was published on June 1st, 2021. And I just think it's so interesting. Here's what they say. Infectious disease experts are again pushing back against armchair molecular biologists who continue to make false claims about PCR tests, the primary method for diagnosing COVID-19. These claims have circulated on social media since the beginning of the pandemic and have been repeatedly debunked, but nevertheless they persist in a variety of forms. One of the most common false claims is that PCR tests are prone to huge numbers of false positives, and this is often rooted in a misunderstanding of how these tests work, says Jonathan Jerry, a biologist scientist with McGill University in Montreal. Well, apparently he hasn't seen this 2007 article that outlines faith in quick tests lead to epidemic that wasn't. Right, and it's the PCR test that was to blame. At Dartmouth, the decision, this is the New York Times article, at Dartmouth, the decision was to use a PCR for polymerase chain reaction. It's a molecular test that until recently was confined to molecular biology laboratories. That's kind of what's happening, said Dr. Catherine Edwards, an infectious disease specialist and professor of pediatrics at Vanderbilt University. That's the reality out there. We are trying to figure out how to use methods that have been the purview of bench scientists. The Dartmouth whooping cough study shows what can ensue. To say the episode was disruptive was an understatement, said Dr. Elizabeth Talbot, Deputy State Epidemiologist for the New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services. You cannot imagine, Dr. Talbot said. I had the feeling at the time like this gave us a shadow of a hint of what it might be like during a pandemic, a flu pandemic, a pandemic epidemic. Neither coughing long and hard nor even whooping is unique to whooping cough, and many people with whooping cough have symptoms that, like those of a common cold, a runny nose, or an ordinary cough, or those of a common cold, runny nose, or cough. Almost everything about the clinical presentation of whooping cough, especially early whooping cough, is not very specific, said Dr. Kirkland. That was the first problem in deciding whether there was an epidemic at Dartmouth. The second was with PCR, the quick test to diagnose the disease, Dr. Kreitzinger said. With whooping cough, she said there are probably 100 different PCR protocols and methods being used throughout the country. It's unclear how often any of them are accurate. We have a number of outbreaks where we believe that despite the presence of PCR positive results, the disease was not whooping cough, Dr. Kreitzinger added. At Dartmouth, when the first suspected whooping cough cases emerged and the PCR test showed whooping cough, doctors believed it. The results seemed completely consistent with the patient's symptoms. That's how the whole thing got started, Dr. Kirkland said. Then the doctors decided to test people who did not have severe coughing. Because we had cases we thought were whooping cough, and because we had vulnerable patients at the hospital, we lowered our threshold, she said. Anyone who had a cough got a PCR test, and so did anyone with a runny nose who worked with high-risk patients like infants. That's how we ended up with 134 suspect cases, Dr. Kirkland said. And that she said that was why 1,445 healthcare workers ended up taking antibodies, and 4,524 healthcare workers at the hospital, or 72% of all the healthcare workers there, were immunized against whooping cough in a matter of days. If we had stopped there, I think we all would have agreed that we had an outbreak of whooping cough and that we had controlled it, Dr. Kirtland said. But epidemiologists at the hospital and working for states of New Hampshire and Vermont decided to take an extra steps to confirm that what they were seeing really was whooping cough. The Dartmouth doctors sent samples from 27 patients they thought had whooping cough to the state health departments and the Center for Disease Control. There, scientists tried to grow the bacteria, a process that can take weeks. Finally, they had their answer. There was no whooping cough in any of the samples. We thought, well, that's odd, Dr. Kirkland said. Maybe it's the timing of the culture, maybe it's a transport problem. Why don't we try serological testing? Certainly, after whooping cough infection, a person should develop antibodies to the bacteria. They could only get suitable blood samples from 39 patients. The others had gotten a vaccine, which itself elicits the antibodies for whooping cough. But when the Center for Disease Control tested those 39 samples, its scientists reported that only one showed increases in antibody levels indicative of whooping cough. The disease center did additional tests too, including molecular tests, to look for features of the bacteria, the whooping cough bacteria. Its scientists also did additional PCR tests on samples from 116 to 134 people who were thought to have whooping cough. Only one PCR test was positive, but other tests did not show that the person was infected with the whooping cough bacteria. The disease center also interviewed the patients in depth to see what their symptoms were and how they were evolved. It was going on for months, Dr. Kirtland said, but in the end, the conclusion was clear. There was no whooping cough epidemic. We were all somewhat surprised, Dr. Kirkland said, and we were left in a very frustrating situation about what to do when the next outbreak comes. The big message is that every lab is vulnerable to having false positives, Dr. Petey said. No single test result is absolute, and that is even more important with test results based on PCR. But the CDC says, no. Experts say PCR tests are routinely described as the gold standard for a reason. The National Human Genome Research Institute in the United States described the technology as one of the most important scientific advances in molecular biology. The main advantage, especially during a pandemic, are the tests are highly accurate and sensitive and fast. Sure they are. Totally believe you. Totally believable. Okay, I'm going to move over to Redacted. Holy smoke, we're long today. Sorry about that. Check out CanadaPoly.com, check out CanadaReport.co, check out SpeakingVoicely.co, and have a wonderful, wonderful day.